Sparkle.
Oh, hey there. You saw the subject, right?
What is it?
Should child labor be legal? Or illegal, sorry. I am proposing.
Legal but only for you.
Yeah, are you interested in debating that topic?
Well, in general, I don't think that any of us really agree with that.
Yeah, I don't think you're gonna find anyone purporting to like child labor, and if they did, they would probably be suspect for being banned.
Yeah,
Well,
I guess it depends on what child
in
labor
general,
means
if they
in
did,
this
they'd probably be like, like plantation, like CEO of companies that own a lot of plantations.
I mean, let's think of the most realistic example of child labor that could be happening in like the US. I would imagine it would be something like let's say that your parents are farmers and they are just like, hey, I want you to work in the field. I'll give you an allowance. I'm sure that happens.
Yeah, and I think you can do that if your parents own a restaurant or something. Like your kid can work in the
there's a difference between there's two differences between child labor. There's one type of child labor where you're forcing them to do work for your own financial gain, and giving them no allowance or whatever for it, and just giving them food for it in general.
Yeah. What do you mean? Like, I imagine that the term labor implies some type of salary. Like, even like children that worked in factories or coal mines at the end of the 1800s still had a wage.
But then again, I'm pretty sure, like, I don't really think that, say, children, Central America, between there, working in, say, banana farms or whatever, like cocoa bean farms, I'm pretty sure those are pretty big with child labor.
That
I
wouldn't
don't
be
really
child
think that they get
labor.
allowance for that. I think they just get food for it, because, like, originally, a while back, there was a lot, well, really long time ago, mainly Middle Ages, I think. You weren't exactly given much money. You were more or less given access to food and water.
Would it be fair if the child was given like a salary like an adult would be given?
Then I think it would just be a job, and I don't think that it should be forced on them.
Well, that's what labor is generally. If they aren't being compensated in any way, then it's actually just slavery. And of course, slave owners give their slaves food, otherwise their slaves are going to die. So the distinction here would be categorically between child slavery and child labor. Child labor, like, occurred in the U.S. with coal mines and factories and stuff, and they did receive a wage for that. Like, I mean,
now we're at a stalemate here. We're at a stalemate between, like, what is the definition? Because we can't really debate it if it's...
Like, I think that's a fair distinction. Would anyone here disagree with the distinction between child labor and child slavery?
Mm-hmm.
No, I think that makes sense to me. That's how I kind of read it as well.
In any case, both of them are kind of, but real. I mean, like, let's say that there is a child working at a restaurant and their parents like, hey, I want you to, like, to do the dishes or something, and we'll give you an allowance. That's, I mean, my intuition is that's drastically different from forcing some kid to work in, like, a steel factory where their limbs might be cut.
Right. I mean,
well, there's a few differences between child labor. There's, I guess I could categorize it into, like, three ways. There is child labor that that they should not have that job. Say, yeah, like your example, say a steel factory where they can get injured. And then you have, say, let's just say, how about we just say, a second one would be more or less simple jobs. Like our original example, working on a farm, getting allowance. A kid can do that. It's fine. They'll be fine. And then there's slavery, which we all know what that means.
I mean, I think
Yeah,
that there's
but
this
do legal
issue
equivalents.
of the age and age being sort of more like a heuristic for describing someone's maturity or their capability to do a good job and to consent to a job like that. But the line is sort of arbitrary. So like the difference between a 17-year-old versus an 18-year-old isn't so great. And I think there could be an argument for something like, even though they might be legally a minor, that they should still be allowed to work. So
I mean, technically, we should distinct, you know,
Oh, I have
between
knowledge
teenagers.
on actually on brain chemistry. So you want to talk about what can like bye. Sorry.
Like, I kind of forgot what I was talking about.
Darn.
Wait, well, where were we?
oh, we're just talking about age being the thing that
Oh
we're
yeah, sorry.
basing when
Yes,
someone
now I
can
remember.
work and when it's okay for them
We
to
should
work.
we should kind of be we shouldn't be kind of jumping to conclusions that we're gonna put like a toddler in a metal factory. We should I think we're talking more about child labor, not exactly minor labor. And I believe child is like say 12 to 6 maybe, 12 to 7. Somewhere around there.
So sort of like not close to the adult age, but
Not
also
close not close to the adult age, but not too young where they're just in this kind of mid area.
Let's like settle on like 8 to 12 then.
yeah, that sounds good.
8 to
So
12, yeah, that sounds fine.
I remember doing some work at that age. Like my grandparents had a farm. They didn't have me do any intensive labor, but I remember sitting there for like an hour peeling open these like pods that had like green beans in them and like putting them into a bucket.
yeah, I think I want to make a distinction here between labor in the sense of work that a child could do with their family versus labor in the sense of wage labor, like getting a job at a restaurant that's not owned by your family, making a wage that, like, say, an adult would make.
I mean, in general, yeah, I get your distinction there, but I think you kind of I originally thought you were going for the distinction like between simple work, like non-intensive, like you said, just peeling open beans, sitting on maybe a stool or whatever, and like working really hard, like like working things that an adult should be doing.
A plow.
That in general that a kid wouldn't really be very good at, or in general they're just not old enough to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think at in a factory or in a warehouse where there's dangerous work, even the adults have to be trained on how to use that equipment. And if they don't have that training or the permit to use something like a forklift, they're not allowed to. And it would break the rules of the business to do so. I think we could have something like that in the child case too, where the child would need to be trained and need to show they're competent on a plow in order to be able to use it. And age isn't necessarily going to be directly related to that. It might be a good way to sort of shortcut and be like, well, I don't think we should even try and train an 8-year-old. But that doesn't mean an 8-year-old couldn't learn to use the plow.
I mean, I think we're talking about well, the only reason why child labor ever existed is one, it's cheap, and it's just in general easy. A kid will usually follow his parents, or they're naive in general. Just being naive is already something better for, say, companies who need a lot of workers working very cheap. Being naive is what you're gonna need.
In agrarian societies, having children was basically, almost like free slave labor. Like if you're a farmer and you have like 15 kids, and let's say that 9 of them are males, like, wow, I just got 9 new farm hands.
That is true. That is what most of it is really about.
I feel like what this debate, at least for me, what it's sort of centering on, kind of this idea of these young people are still under the guardianship of adults, and if those children are even should be allowed to make these kinds of decisions without their adults' consent, as they are still technically dependent. Um, I'm not quite sure what the answer to that is, but if the child needs like a parent's consent to watch a PG-13 movie, then I think the child should also need their parents' consent in order to take on a job. And I think there might be some context where it's legal if the parent consents to the child getting a job.
Wait, hang on. I highly disagree with this because allowing children to work with parents' consent, I agree, in some cases could be good, but it opens up the door for massive exploitation if the parents are poor, for example. Like if they have to have their child work to guarantee like a source of income, then the system is just like enabling child slavery.
Yeah, that's a good
basically
point.
No different.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I concur with that. That is a good contention. Darn.
I wasn't really thinking of the consequences. I was more thinking of the principle in an abstract sense. But when you add in the consequences, then it becomes obvious why it's wrong.
Yeah, that like it does. On paper, it doesn't seem wrong. But on paper, like the idea that we have in mind is usually like, some middle class family or something, not a working class family where
Right.
the circumstances become drastically different.
Right.
Darn. Huh. Yeah, I mean, if that would be the consequence of it, then I guess I'd be kind of opposed to child labor. And I guess the family doesn't even have to necessarily be a poor family. It could be, a middle class family, but let's say that the parents are very profit driven in their mentality. Like, say they are like a farmer or a landlord or something, and they are living pretty comfortably, but they still see their children as like, oh, I just have 9 new farmhands. This is more profit for me. Like I can imagine, it would be a bad parent, I think, but I can imagine someone, seeing their children as something to exploit for money or labor.
There's a way we can maybe mitigate those consequences, which is limit the hours that children are allowed to work so that they're not being completely exploited by the parents. They could be used for, only 2 hours out of the day, and that's the maximum amount they could work. So the rest of the time, the child would be able to study and get an education, etc.
Yeah, and obviously limitations on the kinds of labor that they could ever be allowed to do.
Yeah.
Sav, it's not as simple as what's wrong with your kids helping you in the fields. It's a lot more complicated, where if you allow the legality of one thing, it becomes really tricky to disallow all the things that you don't want. If you start allowing kids to, I don't know, do farm labor when they're 10 years old, that kind of opens up the door to, I don't know, like allowing them to work in factories operating, Amazon warehouses, for example. I'm like, I don't understand.
Well, you can easily make it where it's legal to work on your own farm with your family, but not legal to work in like a factory that your parents don't own. And then when you do work in those contexts, that there's a limit to the amount of hours that you're allowed to do.
I mean, sure, that's fine, but in practice, I'm very cynical about how that law might, slightly get it, a little tweak so that, it's not just family businesses anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would I would want that to remain illegal. Like the tweaks would be something I would want to not happen as well. So even though it might be, there's sort of this idea that the law can change and there's like this slippery slope it could go down, that doesn't change my view on if it would be fine without that slippery slope. So the question is just is if it could be maintained. Which I think it can, and I think that sort of exists already in some context.
Hmm. Is anyone familiar with the current child labor laws? Like, what do we have to work with? Because I'm personally not familiar with what the current child labor laws are like.
I think you need to be like, I think we still have like laws like 12, like you can 12 or 13, like you can go get a job anywhere, but it can't be certain jobs, and you have to go to school for certain hours. And then 16, it's basically the same thing, and you like in both cases, I think you need written permission from the parents.
What about like 2-year-olds who star in movies? Would you think that should be illegal?
That is a good question. They don't even know they're
it has a
working.
high potential for exploitability, so just on the basis of practicality, then yeah, probably. But I guess like
But
that specific case,
like
no,
Home
there's nothing wrong with it.
Alone or don't take Home Alone away from me.
The kid was definitely not 2 years old.
I know, but there are other movies where there are 2-year-olds and young children inside of them, and there are very specific rules with that. Like, I think under a certain age, they're only allowed to work for like 30 minutes at a time.
Like, what's a pretty big example? Anakin Skywalker in Episode 1 of Star Wars. I think he was only like 8 or 9. So that's in the age range that we're talking about.
Star Wars is cring.
I don't think so.
Next topic in
Then I'll beat
5
you up.
minutes.
This section has been more of a discussion than a debate. I feel we're all we have similar attitudes around this, and then we're kind of nipping at the edges to see what we think should be allowed and shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah, that and we don't really have anything to debate about because we still haven't necessarily agreed on what to argue about. Like, establishing what the current laws are with, like, definitely what age range. We kind of agreed on 8 to 12. Like, there's a lot of parameters that would need to be set for us to even begin debating about it. So really, we're still kind of like in a mix between brainstorming and discussing.
Yeah, true. What's the next topic?
Is he going to get the bot to say?
I just want to thank you all for conceding the debate to me. I appreciate it.
There's not so much of a difference between 16 and 18. Arco Whip 2020.
What? Oh, I don't like where that's going.
I mean,
We conceded, but only out of shock.
I mean, I kind of agree with that. 16 and 18 aren't that different.
Meninism. Oh my god.
There we go again.
We need Meninism.
What is Meninism? What is Meninism?
Why? Why
What
did you do this?
What is it?
Why did you have to make it this topic?
Yeah, this topic is cring. I expect like Sav to defend it, but
But what is it?
it's like the whole idea of MRA because like men are like non-oppressed. Like, okay, so what I will say is that the nuanced take on this topic that I have is yeah, sure, there are a lot of issues facing men, okay? Like, for example, boys are falling far behind girls in schools, and like nearly 90% or something like 80%, 70% of like scholarships are going to girls or whatever. But like,
because boys are
but those
dumb,
can
dude.
be, but Yeah, I would agree with that. But also,
I'm just kidding.
but
I'm kidding.
also, yeah, no, but also, like this entire like these problems can be addressed within the framework of feminism. Like
yeah, I mean, I guess
addressing these problems.
the question I have is like, what is a right that men have that women would not have, and why does it need to be given?
Wait, Sav is big.
Oh, Sav said feminism is as stupid as modern feminism.
Whoa. That's a take.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, what even is modern feminism? We deleted all the women. As
Wait, wait, are there any women in this chat?
I wonder if meninism.
no, where did Sophie go?
She left
wonder
because of the fucking garbage topic.
This chat is patriarchal and very unbased, and this is why we need feminism.
I wonder if meninism would talk about things like divorce laws and what would happen for custody of a child.
Listen, Vikos, right?
This is
Hang on,
garbage
I've
topic.
pushed it. Yeah, this is a pretty bad topic. Yeah, okay. I understand that meninism is about bringing attention to men's unique issues and shortcomings. Okay, I understand this. I just don't think that we need a whole movement for it. Okay, I think that all of these problems can be addressed within the side, like inside the purview of feminism, right? So-
Yeah, what needs to be said, right, is that meninism or men don't really have a problem regarding the conflict theorists' perspective on like societal oppression and things like that, right? The idea here is that if men are oppressed by anything, it is by other men, and thus like the oppression that they face in examples like toxic masculinity is inherently based in features that are considered to be feminine or LGBT or even racial qualities, right? So the idea here is that minority movements that already exist, such as feminism, the Black Rights Movement, etc., are already kind of dealing with this sort of thing and like are meant to deal with this thing and alleviate this problem that men oppressing, like this problem of men oppressing men in such a fashion, right?
Yeah, and I think that reminds me of something that I think is key when it comes to men's right activism or meninism, which is that it's a reaction against.
Yeah.
Yeah, I Vikos, I understand this. This is cringe talking point, okay? Like, yes, I understand the public perception of feminism, right? From an outside. Okay. I don't actually disagree with this, okay? I thought you were saying that, yeah, in reality, it's skewed towards women's rights. I would not agree with that. In its perception is sure, that's fine. And I agree, sure, you need to rebrand the movement. I don't think you need a whole thing called meninism.
I actually don't think you need to rebrand the movement. I think that's a waste of efficiency to call feminism or rebrand feminism to egalitarianism, right? Because at that rate you are becoming a kind of political inefficiency, right? Like we're all egalitarian. Well, then all of a sudden that's almost worse than saying that you're like a leftist, for instance, because there are already like the moment that you start any kind of movement that's like we're egalitarian, you're going to have a ton of infighting, a ton of conflict on the inside, and not only that, you're going to get barely anything done in the first place.
Yeah, I also feel like
I understand this,
reframing
right?
it as egalitarian, I think, makes it seem like the only thing you really have a problem with is the word. And if the only thing you really have a problem is with the word, is it that big a deal that it needs to change?
All lives matter.
No. Yeah, I understand this, okay? I understand that they're all cring, okay? I understand this. Like, rebranding the movement as it stands, especially as egalitarianism, is problematic, right? But what I'm saying is, if you actually want to, like, affect social change, like, de-radicalize people who are, like, you know, like, I hate women or something, I don't know. you probably cannot come at it by using like the word feminism,
Yeah,
because it literally triggers people. Like they hear feminism and their brain just shuts down.
it's
Like,
similar
I've
in
looked-
every aspect to the Red Scare. Yeah, it's like people hear a label and they think things that are not meant to be associated with that label.
All right, now here's my hot take. Here's my hot take. Okay, the most effective way to like de-radicalize people is literally to like do the same thing that radicalizes people to being, you know, right leaning, whatever, to get other views, right? And that is to be like completely dishonest about the depth of the positions you hold, right? Because you can never like convince a person by saying, "Oh yeah, I'm a big feminist. I believe in women's issues." You got to be like, "Oh yeah, the men have problems and women have problems too," and then from there you can actually have a dialogue, right? So I think honestly, I think that's the only way you can like ever convince anyone is to be completely dishonest about the depth of the position you hold, right?
Yeah, and addressing this idea of like having a men's rights issues like movement when it comes to the issues that men face, right? This just goes back to the perspective of conflict theory, in which minority groups, minority movements are already making an attempt to alleviate these issues. So it's not actually necessary nor pragmatic for either an egalitarian front, like an egalitarian movement that is branded as egalitarian, or a men's rights group, like neither of which are actually pragmatic, because these rights, quote unquote, are already being sought after. Well, there are obviously significant issues in all of the, like, considered to be in all of these movements that are not anywhere near done, right? So that's just a matter of time, isn't it? It's not a very good point to hide behind, Ficus.
You're not gonna
I would disagree in
Right.
saying that the feminist movement is very splintered on whether they actually matter. In perspective of when it comes to their internal perspective, that's definitely not the case. Anyone who's splintered about that, and when it comes to the opinions of that, are actually external to the feminist movement.
I would agree with that. Also, Saf, yes, I understand you don't want to support purposeful dishonesty, right? I understand this, but like you realize that the kind of rhetoric that gets these people to come to these conclusions is like, oh, I need to believe in the Meninist movement. The way they get there is through like lying about the actual data, right? So lying about the positions you hold, right, is a far more innocuous lie than lying about the actual, you know, facts and data, which is what leads people to hold these positions. I would definitely say it's the lesser of two evils. If it comes down that if I have to de-radicalize someone, right, I would definitely choose lying and saying, "Oh yeah, I'm just you know, kind of like a little, you know, centrist," rather than, you know, like I think that's much less of a worse lie than saying, you know, oh, you know, men are really oppressed. Like 100% of stuff comes whatever, right? But do they though? Like, hang on. So you disagree with the fact that lying can be good? That's the fundamental contention here.
I mean, Meninism would be based on a lie.
Yep.
If the idea is that
No, hang on. I never said for my benefit. Okay, so yes, I would agree. Oh no, that's so sad. Anyway, I really wanted to hear your Greek accent, but anyway, no, I'm sorry. I'm sure you don't have an accent. Yeah, but anyway, it's not lying for my benefit. It's lying for their benefit in a way, because informing them about the actual reality of the situation and moving them towards the correct conclusions is more important than not lying to them. I would agree. I would say, and you might say, okay, fine, that's patronizing, and I would agree with that. But like, that's how you like get people to stop believing propaganda. Like, that's the only way you can do it. No, no, hang on, hang on. This is, yeah, but like, sure, but like, if you're informing them of the actual nature of things, right? So, okay, you're conflating my views. You're saying, okay, everyone wants to push their views, and you consider your views to be the truth, right? But what I'm not espousing any, like, okay, sure, you can consider feminism. Sure, feminism is a political movement, right? But when it comes to de-radicalizing these people from Menonism, a lot of the stuff that radicalizes them is just a blatant lie in the first place. And a lot of the views that they hold are already included in feminism. So it's not exactly changing like a political view. It's not exactly pushing a political agenda. It's literally just informing them of the true nature of the feminist movement, right? And then from there, they can choose, okay, do I want to join this or do I not want to join this?
Right. Yeah, and what needs to be emphasized again is that minority groups, especially feminism, are being held under a conflict theorist's position, right? Which is to necessitate or bring up the idea that there is a class that is dominant towards every other class, and then there's obviously a minority class, something like that,
Okay, Sav.
in every society.
Yeah, okay, Sav.
So
My push to talk is like kind of broken. Yeah, sorry, fool. I'll let you speak.
no problem.
I don't understand like what you're like. You keep repeating the same thing over and over again. Okay, so you're saying I don't think you should lie to people to get them to a more desired ideological position, right? I'm just gonna flat out. I don't think I can get you to frame it in any other way that would make sense to you. So I'm just gonna say yes. I flat out agree, right? And if we take ideological position to mean anything, any mental state of a person, then yes, this becomes really, really obvious. If you want a person to like learn physics, for example, you have to lie to them. You have to say things all like, "Oh yeah, centrifugal force doesn't actually exist," and then say, "Ah, well, it actually does exist." These kind of like simple. I'm trying to explain it in a way that makes sense, but I don't know. I don't know. Like, I don't know how to explain it.
Like you have to
I
dumb
get
down the
you.
topic.
I have to do that when I'm teaching philosophy to laymen.
Lie to them.
I mean, tell them something that you don't, to say like what he just said, X, Y, and Z isn't real. But the more they get into it, what you mean by not real isn't exactly what they originally understood not real to me.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So, like, in theory, I agree with almost everything you guys have said so far, except that, like, I don't understand how to be so confident the majority of people who endorse feminism truly believe in it in such an extreme view.
It comes like, hold on, what was that again? Because your mic is pretty quiet.
Better now?
Yeah.
All right, so like in theory, I agree with pretty much everything you guys have said, except that I don't fully expect that the people who endorse feminism publicly have such an egalitarian as you guys say.
Sure. I mean, like, I don't think it's one thing to say that feminism strives for equality as a movement. It's another thing to say that it's another thing to say that its individuals are perfect and are not hypocrites of that kind of an ideology.
Mhm.
I'm sorry. Do something. What is our topic now?
Meninism and whether or not it's relevant, I guess.
Well, I actually Okay, what point are we at right now?
We're at lots of points right now, kind of
Alright,
alternating
I guess I
between
can
them.
just start with my own point. Menonism in general, I actually think it's very equal right now. Feminism
Yeah,
had
but
its
like I don't think
Fe-
anyone should technically disagree with you on that. It's observable that
Menonism
anyone kind of
Menonism and well,
anyone in any ideology, any movement kind of wait, oh shit.
yeah, Menonism and feminism are both in general just people trying who don't want to believe in something or just want to say government's bad or this set of people is bad. There's just a lot of people who somewhat find something and they want to believe in something different from everyone else and they want to maybe exclude a certain group that they might not like. So they find feminism and they join the group which made it build very quickly. However, feminism at this current point is more or less a stalemate. It's not exactly fighting for much. And another thing is that something interesting is that a long time ago, feminism had its roots. Feminism was something good. It helped those women gain rights and vote. And some people think the same thing's gonna happen. The men are thinking that nothing's gonna happen and that there's no point to it. However, once they eventually complete it, later we're gonna realize that it's gonna be all good and everything. But in general, it's currently equal, at least in my opinion.
Well, if it
But-
is in a state that's equal, then Menonism would not be relevant at all.
Yeah.
Menonism I believe was more or less created just to retaliate against feminism, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
reactionary. I agree.
But what I find interesting is that you're saying that you said something about feminism no longer being relevant either, something along those lines, and I was curious why you would say that in particular. Sparring.
Like I said, currently, at least in my opinion, they're equal. We have similar rights, and arguments that they force against us have very easy solutions that are already in place, such as rape. They say that only men rape, and then they always want to rape. This is not true. There are cases of women raping. However, it is more common with men, as I believe that sexual impulses are more common with men.
Right. So then, can you explain to me why there are both economic and social cases in which women still struggle in comparison to men? There's still a gender wage gap today by about, I believe it's 80 cents to the dollar right about now, as well as the fact that women face quite a bit of discrimination, not only in the workplace, but in plenty of different subcultures in this country in particular.
Okay,
And to
well,
add,
There's
well,
there's a
we can,
very high
well, in general,
prevalence of. Sorry, you go.
there's
yeah, okay, thank you.
who goes.
Let's just take some example country. I think that from all of our debates, our example country or the country that we should be disputing about is more or less the U.S. It's the main kind of place for things to happen, including coronavirus.
Right. Yep, that's the country I was referring to.
So there's also a very high prevalence of like attitudes between men and women, and in reference to like sexual assault, where it's kind of expected for women to take it. A lot of my female friends have told me like they were raped or sexually assaulted by, say, an uncle, cousin, or something, and when they told somebody, is seen as something that should have been expected. A lot of the like cultural framework we have is something that a lot of women have to deal with, and they had to appear as if they're okay with it, instead of actually being okay with it. That's a lot of what the fight for modern feminism is for. And I do see that there's a lot of feminists that don't understand what the movement is about.
What country do you live in where somebody said when uncle raped them that was expected? What?
Yeah,
It's not that it was
Next
expected,
topic in 10 minutes.
it's not that it was expected, but that like when they, well, let's say when they told their parents, what they said was, "You're just lying. You're just trying to make a fuss." And then after somebody was like, "Oh, well, I mean, that's just what uncles do."
Wait, what country is this?
what
America.
are you talking about? Where it's
No,
like
dude, I don't know what state, if you don't mind me asking.
America is like, okay, I got
Oh.
raped. They're gonna be like, yeah, it's fine, it happens. That's not happens. That what?
But that has nothing to do
Yeah,
with
that
feminism.
actually
That has
does happen
nothing
a
to
lot.
do.
The thing
Oh,
is,
it does
like,
not, dude.
it does.
If that were to
In
happen to
own
my
experience
family,
with
somebody
talking
would
to
probably
women,
be
they've
dead,
literally
dude.
multiply said
No.
the same exact story where like somebody would sexually assault them, somebody would rape them, and then when they said something, there was a billion different excuses men would make. This
Has
is
nothing
like
to do with
literally a problem
feminism, by
that
the way.
feminism is fighting for.
Why does it have nothing to do with feminism? Can you explain that?
Because it's
You can't
against
just
the
say
law.
no.
It's because it's against the law. Like, it's a
There's
law.
a lot of things that are against the law that people
So
don't
does
report.
feminism only deal with the law, or does it deal with other things too?
Let me get this right. So somebody breaks the law, right? And
Answer
they
the
literally
question,
can be thrown
please.
in prison.
Is feminine only relevant to the law, or does it deal with other problems too?
It doesn't deal with rape because it's illegal. So that's my
Answer the question, please. Does feminism only deal with the law, or does it deal with other issues too?
Deals with other issues beyond
Thank
the
you.
law. Thank you.
Yeah, and there's a lot of
The
things that
issue
are
would be
illegal that aren't
cultural
reported.
perceptions
There's
towards
culture.
sexual assault, not just the law. Like, yes, it's illegal, but even if it is illegal, it doesn't change the fact that there is still a culture of apologetics towards it, despite it still being illegal.
So let me
There's
explain to you
also
what would
the fact
happen in
that,
my
like,
family
let's say
if somebody
marijuana is illegal.
accused.
I
Are we
don't see
jumping
people
from
going out
feminism
and
to marijuana?
persecuting, like, oh, your friend smoked weed? I'm gonna report them to. That's also the attitude towards like sexual assault. Like, oh, your friend groped a woman while she was drunk. Well, I'm
This
gonna
is
report you to
apples.
police. Have you ever heard a guy say that? Have you ever heard a guy say,
I've
"Oh, my
had women
friend"?
lie to me about rape. I've had all sorts of anecdotes that go against what you're saying. So
Like what?
I wouldn't use that as a measure. I've had a woman tell me she was going to lie and set a guy up for rape because he pissed her off and cheated on her. You want me to run down a laundry list of lies that I've heard from women regarding rape?
So
Isn't some
you heard a
one-sided thing.
woman lie about rape,
I've had
and
a
you
woman
think that
consult.
like counters the whole attitude that a lot of women have, where like they might have been sexually exploited, sexually assaulted, and nobody, like, people would always downplay it. Like, those are two separate issues, and I agree.
They're not. You have
False rape
anecdotes. I have
allegations are
anecdotes.
very important.
You have
The thing is that
anecdotes.
there was a
Everybody has
case made.
anecdotes.
Like, she had a ton of evidence. Like, she had conversations with the guy that she recorded and screenshotted. She showed this to people, and people would always say, "Hey, you're just overreacting. You're just overreacting. He was just being affectionate. He was just being nice."
You know
Stuff
how
like
this
that.
works? You go to a police station, you file a police report. Don't share screenshots with friends.
She did though.
Feminism. I think people need to just enjoy the freedoms and rights they have and exercise them. So when something's illegal and somebody commits a crime, you go to the police station with evidence and you file a police report.
The point of feminism is that the women aren't always believed because of the sexism that exists in our society.
Sexism definitely exists, but sexism is not feminism. And I actually think, in general, feminism has some sort of a push, but in general, they actually say, at this current point, they are a lot more radical than they currently are. The wage gap can easily be explained by over history. If you look, you can see men usually in general just got men in general usually worked better jobs. It's not because those women applied for it and got and were rejected because they were women. It's just they didn't actually apply for it, and however applied for a different job. The wage gap
Why though?
can be explained through this mainly. However, there is sexism that exists, and it should be resolved. However, it's more or less something like racism. it's in a person's head. You can never, if no matter how hard you try, you're not going to be able to get it out of people's heads. And no matter how much money, no matter how much enforcement you're going to have, people will have these opinions, and they will keep those opinions unless you arrest them for it, in which they still will have those opinions, however will and even have and most likely have them more extreme.
There's research to suggest the opposite.
Yeah, you can socially engineer people away from certain perceptions and points of view. Not in all cases. Obviously, there are exceptional cases where people are extremely stubborn or very fixed in their belief systems. But you can definitely exert social control over populations, or manufacture their interests or change their points of view on things.
Isn't that manipulating?
Wait, hang on. I want to more directly attack the point made by you, Moi. Okay, so if I was hearing you correctly, you were saying that sexual assault or rape isn't a problem because women can just directly report it to the police. Yes.
If someone commits a crime against you, that's what you do. So yes, they already have a legal framework and a way to handle it.
And this is the exact same argument that like a white moderate would make in the 1950s. Under the 15th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, okay, you're not allowed to disenfranchise voters, right? Or you're not allowed to bar people from voting based on color, okay? Now, if you were, the exact analogy of your argument, right, would be saying to a black person that their right to vote is not barred.
That doesn't change anything. Let him make his point.
I don't get the analogy. Continue.
Okay, hang on. I'm saying, yes, sure. There is an existing legal procedure, right? There are laws, and there is an existing legal procedure for people to report this kind of thing, okay? But that doesn't mean that it's gonna happen, right? So are you denying that voter disenfranchisement happened in the 50s? That, the poll tax was never a thing? That, this whole grandfather clause shit was never a thing? Or is that what you're arguing? Because just because laws exist doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be enforced properly. There are always loopholes. And in this case, it's more subtle, right? It's not necessarily a loophole in the law. It's a general, attitude towards, of women, of reporting it.
You can change a person's mental. Basically, exactly. I'm pretty sure what UDS is trying to say is you can, if you pressure that person, say after committing some sort of crime to them, you can pressure that person through peer pressure or whatever kind of pressure that you are able to do. And eventually, once you have that kind of pressure applied, they will be coaxed out of going for the police. This is why a lot of sexual crimes are not really reported because of pressure.
I understood.
They're not reported because they're not believed by the police or the society.
It doesn't work that way. You go and file a police report, it's a police report. Whether they believe you or not, they have to investigate it because it's a crime that you went and filed a police report for.
They can actually. I'm pretty sure that they can reject.
They can, but you at least filed it. It's on record. There's
what you do.
Yeah, a piece of paper.
What do you do? You literally get a lawyer, right? Like, what do you mean? What do you do? Do people not know how to actually pursue the legal system with all of the rights and opportunities?
Well, it doesn't even matter if they can pursue the legal system or not, because you already admitted feminism fights for things beyond laws.
Wondering to what depth I should respond and make commentary here. Regarding what you said, UDS, you're conflating two issues here. The difference between giving someone rights and freedoms, and those rights and freedoms being dependent upon social attitudes, versus making something illegal, right? And actually pursuing that as a crime, literally just being dependent upon you going into a police station, filing a police report. They're night and day. I don't know how you're conflating those two.
It's not a conflation. I'm saying the point is that feminism doesn't
people can't vote.
Again, you have the right to do something, right? You're giving a new freedom to someone that is based on social conditioning. Your right to file a police report when a crime is committed is pretty black and white. There's no gray area here. You go to a police station, I would like to report a crime, and you file a police report. I don't know what you imagine needs to change in way of that whole process. It's
I'm not
black and
talking
white.
about
We're
that
not talking about
process.
the
I'm
legal
talking
process. We're
about
talking about the social attitudes around it.
yes.
Wait,
thank
wait.
you.
So hold on. A social attitude about a highly offensive, historically for thousands of years, has
No,
been
it
made
wasn't. It
illegal.
hasn't been for thousands of years. Rape still happens today, and it's
Like me to point you
accepted.
to a law written in stone thousands of years ago that made rape illegal.
But you're saying that it's been illegal all over the world for thousands of years. That's not the case.
What?
I didn't know that if a law exists, then the crime stops happening, and so do the attitudes around it.
It's also a
It's like,
social
let's look
stigma,
at the
my
problem
dude.
with
Like,
marijuana.
you
Let's
think
look at
rape
marijuana,
is
for
like
example.
celebrated in the society, or is it
Let's
actually
look at
considered to be a
let's look at
heinous
marijuana,
crime?
for example.
Please stop
Almost
going from
everybody here
topic to
knows somebody
topic. I
that
don't need
smokes marijuana.
analogies.
None of us
Marital
report
rape
it.
was legal
wait,
like
hang
Nobody
on.
not that
report
long
marijuana.
ago.
Hang on. Okay, let me attack that point, okay? Yes, it is a heinous crime if you are convicted, okay? The whole issue is, yes, there is a legal process by which women can come forward and accuse people, right? Now, even before you get to that stage of accusing people, there's a whole lot of, emotional turmoil of the, on behalf of the victim. Should I speak up? Will I be believed? And then you have to drag your reputation through the mud fighting a legal case, right? Like, I don't understand. Like,
But here's the thing. Sometimes people come into this with emotions and anecdotes about hearing stories and whatever feelings they have. This is the reason why we have a legal system, is to cut all of that out and determine what happened. None of these things that you imagine, or you're changing the culture about rape. Sorry, dude. If a guy gets accused of rape, he has like a fucking red scar. He has like a permanent scar on his reputation. I don't know what you guys think society is, like a free for all against women, but I'm sorry, that's not America. That's not American society. If
None of us are making that
hold on,
position.
let me
That's a
just
straw man of our position.
let me
You're
make a
straw
couple
manning
more
us.
points. I'm not straw
Just
manning.
don't straw man us then.
I don't want to hear the pity party then, because men, if you get accused of rape, you're fucked. I don't know what you imagine happens in society right now, but it's not celebrated. So if every daughter, every woman has a father, they likely have brothers, they likely have male friends. That woman comes and tells a man, hey, like, this guy raped me. It lays out a pretty convincing case. Like, the legal system is the last fucking thing that guy has to worry about. Like, again, this is a historic sort of trend. Maybe by like demonizing men, you're not going to have men coming to your defense anymore, and your literally only option is going to be the police, and that's what's happening in modern society. But back in the day, right, if some woman came forward and said somebody laid hands on her, well, you're probably going to get like 3 or 4 guys coming to beat the shit out of you, right? So I don't know what you expect in this modern society where everybody wants to twist, manipulate, and change the narrative. But this is the kind of foolishness you'll get, where it's this gray area now. It used to be pretty black and white. Once this gray area, I mean, yeah, if you want all of these powers, you want all of these exceptions, it comes with downsides. So I don't know what to say to that. Like, the modern world is pretty clear to me as to why it is the way it is. If you think you're going to manipulate or demonize men more and give women rights, that boat has sailed, man. That
so
whole
your
movement
argument is that
out
the
of gas.
social consequence of a man being accused of rape is so great that the justice system as it stands today, or the legal avenues for women to accuse men are completely sufficient. Is that your argument?
Step into it 2 ways. Would you say the legal system is biased towards benefiting women or men?
That's kind of irrelevant to the argument, especially
It's
with
the
crime of
umbrella
rape.
we're dealing with. So, like, if you don't want to answer,
Yes, the legal system has biases. I would agree
towards
with
women
that.
or men, is it more biased towards benefiting women or benefiting men? Divorce, rape,
Depends
you
on
name
what
it.
crime. Wait, hang on. It depends on what crime you're talking about. If you're talking about violent offenses, I feel free to admit that yes, women get like a lower sentence for the same crime, right? And we can address that differently. But right now we're arguing about a completely different topic.
We're talking about accusation, right? So you walk into a police station to report a crime, violence, rape, whatever you want to like chalk it up to be, a person-on-person violence or a crime committed against a person, against their person. You're saying the law benefits women or men? Who gets the preference here? Or does this walk into
Okay.
in your imagination?
Can you? All right, hang on. Repeat your question. So you're saying, as I walk into the police station, make the accusation, who does
Society.
the justice system, or who does society? Okay, we're talking about society now. Who
Society
does society
justice.
fit?
Sorry for like keeping. I don't intend to just try to like trap you or extend the question, but the legal system, society, both. You could answer both. I would appreciate it.
So both the social, making up a new word, the combination of this the societal consequences and the legal consequences, right? That who's gonna be like who's gonna lose that, right? Sorry, I'm stumbling over words, but I kind of understand the question, right? So you're saying if a woman comes forward and accuses someone, right?
Next topic in 60 seconds.
That kind of accusation, who loses more reputation or whatever. Is that what you're saying?
Hot take. Nothing. I'm not going to hold you to anything like say on this. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
As it depends on a lot of factors, including socioeconomic ones, right? Like, for example, if it's just like the secretary accusing the boss, it's not going to go anywhere because it's just her word against his, right? And especially like the things that we're seeing with Tara Reid and Biden, like people are calling Tara Reid like a Russian agent or something, like stupid shit like that, right? So it depends a lot on the situation.
She filed a criminal report.
I would generally say the harm in, creating this kind of will people believe me, it's just my word against theirs. It happened a long time ago. It wasn't, a big issue. Yes, I would say that's far more harmful than the consequences that you think would happen. I'm not saying, okay. Sorry.
Well, quick question. Did I think Tara Reid filed a criminal complaint, right? Yes, she did. Washington Metropolitan.
Yeah, she did, and you saw how that worked out, right? Like Biden's career is completely fine.
Hold on. Here's the thing. You file a police report, that's who handles it. This let me influence society, or let me get society to like basically jump on this guy and beat the shit out of him. We've moved beyond that primitive sort of thing. So if someone committed a crime, only recourse you really have is going down to a police station, filing a police report. Police are going to do their investigation. Justice system isn't perfect. Sometimes it fucks up, and that's the end of it, right? Like we don't allow as a society like this bandwagon demonization of people beyond like the court system, legal system. We're a civilized modern society.
That's
I don't know
not what anyone is arguing for. I'm not arguing that as soon as someone gets accused of rape, you should go and like beat them up or something. I'm arguing that the conditions around accusing people, or these types of conditions, this type of stigma that is associated with it in society, these kinds of things should be like minimized, right? Like a woman should not have to worry about what's going to happen to my reputation if they come forward with an accusation, right? That's what I'm saying.
I don't see, but here's the thing: you use words like use social engineering, manipulation. Grown ass man, I'm gonna believe whatever the fuck I want, right? So like no one's gonna come and tell me what I should view as society or women or whatever. So you're gonna hear the same from a lot of people, and it's not hard to detect someone trying to social engineer movement. A lot of these modern movements are pretty transparent, right? And not many of my, I guess, boomer brain ideology, although I'm not a boomer, is going to change. So, and you don't have the right to change anyone's viewpoint. This is why we have a legal system. If someone has committed a crime, if someone is treating you unbiased in the workplace, you can sue them. You can go to the court system. Those are the professionals who handle it. Society and trying to manipulate people or socially engineer people to get on your side or your movement, that's not cool in my book. I actually view that in a negative light. I don't know what people, I guess, my opinion, right? Like focus more on living your life.
Yes, I understand that you're repeatedly misconstruing my point. I never said demonize anyone.
Debate hall.
The text.
Okay, fine. We'll just move on to the next topic.
Are trap gay?
Yeah, okay, so I'm opposing this, I think. Yep.
You're opposing that things aren't primarily driven by self-interest?
Yeah,
I think I'm on the same side as you. Am I not? I answered opposing to the question. Hang on.
I propose.
I think that it would be a dog pile if I stayed on opposing, so I'm going to switch to propose and join you.
What is the next topic?
The topic is humans are primarily driven by self-interest.
This is going to turn into a semantic nightmare.
Oh yes, for sure. So
Yeah.
so Moi and I are on the side of yes, humans are primarily driven by self-interest. Nothing can be viewed separate from the self, and any interest would inherently be driven by the self.
See,
No.
I would
You want to go? You can start.
I would argue that you're correct, that humans are primarily self-interested, but I would also argue that this is noxious towards human development in the long run, and we should do everything.
But the
we can to
proposition
address
is
this.
humans are primarily driven by self-interest.
Yes, I agree with that. I also think
So it
it's a
doesn't matter if
massive
the
weakness.
consequences are. It doesn't matter if the consequences are noxious or not. That's not the debate. The debate is, are they driven by self-interest? And they are, in my opinion.
Okay.
So what's the argument against why they are not driven by self-interest?
Well, this entire argument is going to hinge on what we mean by the word self-interest. So, if by self-interest, what we mean is that the motivation system that drives you towards action is spatiotemporally local to a brain, to your brain, then the only way anyone would ever be able to disagree with that definition of self-interest would be the invocation of some metaphysic of mind being independent of something spatial, temporally localized to their brain. So unless anyone here ascribes to that kind of metaphysic, we don't have any disagreement about motivation being generated by your particular brain.
Yeah. So what would be the opposite position?
So another way that we could construe self-interest, like let's say all of us agree that motivations are generated by your particular brain, we could then differentiate the targets of those motivations. So we could start talking about is what you conceive as being the benefit of completing whatever action you're motivated to complete. Do you perceive the greatest net benefit to be to you, that you'll benefit the most from it, or that others will benefit the most from it? That's to say, imagine that you're Thich Kwonduk, the monk that set himself on fire in protest. Obviously, you're not going to come out on that. You're going to burn to death. You're going to experience severe pain, and then you're going to die. You're not going to have any long-term consequential benefits to this. But you think that by doing this protest and having international attention being brought to this, that you will help more people in the long run. So you could say that the target consequence of that interest is to help other people at the expense of the self. So Thich Kwonduk basically is like, okay, I'm going to die to the benefit of others. You could say that was motivated in himself, like motivated by his own brain, like he has a dopaminergic circuit, and perhaps the idea of sacrificing himself for others gave him a kick of dopamine. But if you've defined self-interest to just necessarily be localized to a brain, then that has to happen. I mean, he couldn't have a motivation if it didn't come from his brain.
Yeah.
So
that's
the
I
only
think that's a really
the only like effective distinction that we could make, instead of like it just turning into an A equals A, is to distinguish between the types of consequences that we're seeking, and do we perceive those consequences to be of a greater benefit to ourselves or a greater benefit to others?
I agree with this distinction.
So it would only be not self-interest if the benefit is greater for others.
Yes.
And so the question then for me is is it the case that in that circumstance, would I find it to be self-interest still?
Yes. But then we're just going to be like disagreeing definitionally. Like,
no, I mean, I accept your definition, and I think it's a good one.
Okay.
I'm trying to see if I can. I'm trying to see if I concede or if I can find a way around it.
All right. I'll give you time though.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me
Rafro's definition is really good.
Yeah, it's excellent, and I think that kind of gets at the heart of the issue.
And often they will both align. They don't have to be opposites.
No pressure.
I mean, I guess the question then for me also comes down to the idea of like, what is the self? Because there are sort of two ways we can think of the self. We can think of the self in the species being way, where we say we talk about topics in a certain way, or we have certain attitudes or dispositions, and that imagining of self is more inclusive of other people. So when we invoke something like a species being self, when we are looking at the benefit of society at the expense of our bodily self, in a way we are still fighting for the species being self getting benefit in that context. And it would be self-driven in a similar way, although the definition of the self would be expanded.
Yeah.
So it also comes down to the definition of self in this context too, where are we referring to self as simply the bodily self, or are we referring to self as this idea of a community or our species being?
Yeah, then if like everything that you did was in the interest of, say, other humans and at the expense of animals, you could say, well, that's selfish because you're excluding. I mean, yeah, this also depends on where we're parsing things or how we're conceptualizing things. But I will point out that this still amounts to like a conceptual or nominal like disagreement and not a literal disagreement. It's like all of us, unless we have anyone here as some type of weird metaphysic, would seem to be like talking about physical and particular things in the world, and we're not being contentious about the facts of what happened, but rather how we're going to draw the conceptual boundaries around objects in the world, and what we're going to call a self, what we're going to call self-interest, what we're going to call ego, what we're going to call altruism. And so our disagreement would be about how are we going to draw the borders on a map and not the features of the map itself. And that disagreement, I think, inevitably turns into something more arbitrary of whether or not we want to include into our definition of the self only the particular individual, or if we want to talk about collectives, or if we want to talk about all living things altogether. You could say, oh, well, all living things use inanimate objects to their benefit, so therefore they're self-interested because they're using, rocks and minerals or, soil or sunlight. Like we could really just...
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, it sort of seems like that as a species, we are a social species, and I think that there is a strong feeling of ourself being this community. As Aristotle said, man is a political animal. I think that is talking about that same function as a human. So even though there might be this sort of linguistic abstraction that would be arbitrary, I do think that when it comes to our attitudes about things and the motivations behind them, there is this tendency for humanity to view itself as a collective. And there's also this sort of ability to view it as an individual too. But I do think as a social animal that our self would extend to our society, so it would still be benefiting ourself and be motivated by ourself when we are trying to benefit society at large.
Let's take the discussion to how people tend to use these words. So if someone goes up to someone And like the common usage of the word selfish is something like, "Oh, you're being selfish," or "You're selfish," and it's usually like you're pointing the finger at someone, and you're making a judgment about them as a particular individual being selfish. And in that case, like in that particular common usage, we seem to be more interested in the goals and interests of a particular actor rather than of a community.
Yeah, but we also acknowledge that when we harm the community, we harm ourselves. And there's this idea that when we are, even if it doesn't harm me to be racist, I harm the community by being racist and promote this type of toxicity that would eventually come back and harm me.
Then I suppose we could look at intentionality, which that would be a hard thing to penetrate because you don't necessarily have access to other people's private experiences. But you could say, what would you say to someone whose interest in helping others is purely for helping the other and not for the perceived benefits to himself? Let's go back to the example of Thich Van Dyck burning himself to death. Yeah. He wouldn't be able to reap any of the benefits of his his community if he helps his community because, well, he's committed altruistic suicide. He'll be dead. So, where does that example fall into the idea of construing it in the light of the community when you choose an action that will take your own life so that you don't reap the benefits of your community any longer?
Yeah, I mean that's a difficult question. I mean, I think that there is a worldview that Buddhist monk had, which is this idea that the self is all of humanity, that the individual self is something that is seen as illusory. It is the true self is interdependent on all things. So he already had a worldview that his true self, his true Buddha nature, was something that was present in all of humanity. And so even though he might sacrifice his body, he would be preserving. He would be fighting for something for the body of humanity.
Okay, that's a good rebuttal, and I would concede that. So,
but I think your analogy could still stand in another context if we took someone with a different worldview.
Let's imagine that it was someone like, I don't know, David Hume or something, someone skeptical, atheistic. They don't.
Mm-hmm. Or we could take the example of maybe a soldier who was fighting a war and then he throws his body on a grenade.
Yeah, sure.
In that context, would I say the same thing? Because in that world, the soldier would, in this hypothetical, the soldier would have an identity of the self being his body.
Yeah.
Would I concede that he acted beyond his self-interest in that context? And I think I would. I think as that soldier who would be viewing the self and would be viewing his motivations, even if I could make an argument that from an evolutionary standpoint or from an inherent human nature standpoint, that he was acting in this interest for a community and an expanded sense of self. I think based on how we've agreed on self-interest is used, that person would be acting against their self-interest. And in that case, I would have to concede the point that humans are primarily driven. I can see the point that in that context, the human would be driven by the self. Sorry. Yeah.
Next topic in 5 minutes. Sorry, Arco.
May I interject really quick?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Because you're acting in an altruistic manner doesn't mean that you're not necessarily forsaking the interests of the self. It just means that sometimes you will recognize that the interests of the whole are more important than the interests of the self.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not like as if you are betraying the ideology by doing so. It's that sometimes people can recognize that things are greater than them, and unless towards preserving the whole, ultimately, even if it might not come, like you mentioned,
to harm the self in question, it will come to harm all selves eventually.
Yeah. Well, I think you guys have made a very strong case, and I concede the point.
Wait, what? Wait, who conceded what? I wasn't listening this whole time.
I conceded that humans are primarily driven by self-interest.
I mean, is it not the self-interest that you want the group to do better than the self? That is a self-interest in itself?
Not if
we kind of got into that already.
Yeah, we differentiated. We differentiated between like the motivation like system that you have and the intended consequences that you have. Like that was one of the first things.
This is really boring. All right, here's a compromise. Okay.
I just have a really quick interjection, just super quick. Hey,
Okay.
Death, are you there?
Oh my god!
Holy shit!
You motherfucker! You're supposed to be paying attention.
Okay.
Damn.
Okay, here's a compromise because this is really
muted.
All interest. I already added Rothril and Arca, but I don't think you saw my message. If all interest is self-interest, then yes, humans are primarily driven by self-interest. Please move on to the next topic.
Well, we talked about that from the beginning. That from that position, everything would be driven by the self. But
yeah, then it's just A equals A at that point.
Yeah, exactly. You could differentiate which is exactly how boring this conversation is. Can we please move on to the next topic?
No.
I would finish this by saying that in a perfect society, the interests of the self perfectly align with the interests of the whole, and that's what we should be striving to build towards.
That's a beautiful sentiment.
How about we get St. Catherine into this and talk about complete obedience?
Oh, I'm not even gonna step into that one.
Wait, hold on. Wait.
Nope. Sorry. I'm not even gonna go there. The debate topic. Oh my god.
Jesus Christ.
We got a
Black
big boy
culture
debate.
is responsible for higher poverty and prison rates among Black Americans.
I'm gonna check my privilege here and stand out of this debate.
Oh
no, that's easy though.
If you're darker.
That's easy.
This is a spicy prompt. Holy shit!
Right?
Boys, I don't think I'm going to be arguing in this one.
How do I do numbers? How do I do numbers?
All right, so can we make the emotes
Look,
what
the
happened?
Joker and just a normal person like Jared?
Tag me when it's a new topic. I kind of want to go do something else for a
What
second.
just happened? Broke the server, dude, with that topic.
All right, I'm actually gonna dip. I just want to say,
Wait, what happened?
I love black people. Okay,
What
I love
happened
black
to-
people. They're my favorite type of people. All right, that's
I
all I
have a
want to
black
say.
friend that cannot be racist.
That's all I want to say. That's all I want to say. Okay, I love you. I'll see you guys later.
Okay.
I'm proposing. I'm sorry. Wait, what? What happened to the topic?
I mean, I didn't see any tax fraud by African Americans during slavery.
Shit.
So,
I mean, there's different types of crime: white collar crime, blue collar crime. If you actually do the summation of like the economic like nature of it, I'm pretty sure the white collar crime would be far ahead of like blue collar crime as far as theft and shit like that. Violent crime is something different.
yeah.
So we're dividing
And a lot
this
of the
by
problems
economic
that-
class?
A lot of the problems
Just
that
by
people
absolute
attribute to,
impact on society. If
a
you're
lot of the
stealing
problems that
money, you're
people
stealing
attribute
money.
to like African Americans are just problems that poor people have. Like,
Well,
if you
I have a
see the
question,
crime
though.
rates for like
Sorry.
impoverished people versus like crime rates for people who aren't.
What defines black culture here? That's the question.
Let me cut through it. There's a backdrop, I think, foundation as to why like crime is elevated amongst African American community, and that leads to really negative things that were placed against them historically. It's not an excuse. That's not an excuse that can be applied forever. It's one that's like dwindling out as time goes on. But then when you have that, you have also a culture that sets in that is pretty toxic. It does lead to more. On top of that foundation, it leads to even more heightened like crime, which is unfortunate. Many black leaders who've ran over the coals have even stated this. Some of them are in jail right now for unrelated reasons. But yeah, I don't. It's a contentious topic, and I think it's a multi-pronged, multivariate like formula in terms of the crime rates. Like some of it's historic backdrop, some of it's Black culture, some of it's a lot of other factors, poverty. So I think if you look at it like that and you present it as that, you can discuss it without much contention. I think the contention comes when you argue like there's some absolute nature to it that's only one variable, which is just foolish.
Right.
Yeah.
So like to say, well, like the issue here though is like we don't know the parameters for what defines a Black culture here because that's kind of vague and blurry. You could say something like, "Oh yeah, it's how a Black man or woman is raised around like their like Black family," something like that, which is like weird to say because there's still plenty of counterpart variables within studies that have to go into like familial shit like that. So it's like what defines any kind of racial culture here, and that becomes problematic in itself.
You could just run off a list like like anti-police, anti-reporting of crimes, yada 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 yada. Just, the list goes on and on. They're not obviously when you say culture, it's not something that applies 100% of Black people. And again, this is how you navigate this topic like better. But there are definitely aspects of African American communities, particularly the more like lower income communities. One can say contribute directly to like higher like crime. So the idea here is just to piece it apart and not make like absolute statements about all Black people. I don't think it's problematic to discuss it. Many Black leaders have said this.
Yeah, when looking through this windows, there's like two problems with the with the term Black culture. There's the idea of culture, like which doesn't obvious like the quote unquote Black culture obviously doesn't all Black people, and then there's the issue of like race, in which being Black doesn't apply to everyone with melanin. That is similar to what is stereotypically Black, doesn't apply to and does apply to people very much without a lot of melanin, right? Because it's, if anything, more so based on the social construction of the idea of that race. So then there are two issues there where it's like doesn't apply to all Black people, and being Black doesn't apply to a specific physical stereotype. And so
I get the colloquial reference. I don't know if like I'm trying to help you out here. Like it doesn't further my statements that I'm African American, but like if you need pointers, I could give you some. I don't. Right. If it's too contentious to discuss, I'm fine with that. But I think everybody knows what we're talking about.
Yeah.
If I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, Cosby said some things, and he's in jail for rape right now. But yeah, he kind of laid it out, the blueprint for what the Black community needs to address as far as like toxic culture. Nobody listened to him, so
yeah, I think the important thing that needs to be said is like this culture. Yeah, it's ridiculous. The prompt itself is ridiculous, saying Black culture, because obviously there's no archetypal Black culture.
Well, when people say Black, they often mean African American. You know, like there's no doubt that like if like an Eritrean were to talk to like an African American, I mean I can't say this in absolutes, but I'm not sure they would find that much in common.
Yeah.
Besides, I don't know, maybe being discriminated against by the police.
I mean to speak even under the perspective of like this microscope of like African American, right? There's still no archetypal Black culture in that case, right? Like one could say, oh yeah, they like soul food and all these different preferences that like Black people stereotypically have, but at any rate, like these preferences don't say much.
Like I linked to Bill Cosby's like pound cake speech, which is when he criticized Black culture. Like, so if you need an orientation, like I can do that, but it's not a hand wavy thing. Like everybody knows what society is talking about when they speak on some of the negative aspects of Black culture, so the toxic aspects. That being said, every culture has its toxic aspects. So it's not like Black people are only people with like cultural issues, but that's the thing, is you can have this conversation if everybody admits that in my cultural grouping we have issues too, generally speaking. I feel like when society tiptoes around this, like nobody really gets to call each other out for like obvious fucking problems like cultural. So
people keep saying, like, I just saw Steph say like Black culture is distinct, and like this example with the pound cake speech, but it's still there's a logical problem with this, because it's, especially the prompt, like, from one point of view, there's the problem in which we state like Black people have a culture, right? Which obviously, as you stated, doesn't apply to all Black people. But the idea that there is some archetypal way to act, even if this wasn't like a racial thing, it's quite apparent, right, that these cultures are not contingent upon something that is contingent on something that is like race, something like race. It's not contingent on something like race. So when somebody says Black culture, it's not contingent on Black people, right? Because people who are not Black can definitely be a part of quote unquote Black culture, can definitely be a constituent or even act in a way that is quote unquote Black culture, right? And these cultural attitudes certainly don't come from didn't come from historically Black people. And so it's just weird it's a problem with the label Black culture, right? And then even after that problem with the label, there's the problem of like, how does one make the inference that Black culture, aka culture from Black people, has any kind of consequence whatsoever? Because when somebody says Black culture, they're clearly meaning some kind of superset of many other different cultures, many other different social implications that don't exactly add up, and there is no real essential aspect to what makes this Black culture, what makes Black people, and even more so, what makes crime for this arbitrary metric of Black culture.
I mean, but this is what I mean, and I'll repeat what I just typed out, is like, you can't fix problems you don't want to identify or discuss. So
it's not that, it's just that the identification is already flawed in itself, right? So if you wanted to say solve a problem within the Black community that consists of like crime and issues like crime and things like that, obvious problems within the Black community, right? You wouldn't be saying things like, oh, we need to look at what Black culture is, right? But like what you're effectively doing when you are resolving or fixing, hold on. What you're ultimately doing when you're going into the Black community, and like trying to fix like social issues within the Black community, you aren't actually doing anything about this label Black culture. You're saying that you're fixing quote unquote Black culture, but what you're doing is you're going to these different subcultures, these different instances in which one person was raised.
Like,
I'm not filibustering.
I mean, there's real issues to discuss. Like me, you know, I'm African American. I can list off like 10 pages worth, right? But that same sense, I can do the same for other cultural groups, right? So the issue here is, everybody's sort of on board with having a chill discussion about these issues without getting butthurt, and somewhat identify things that a person in that group maybe doesn't even realize themselves. That's the whole point. It's not to degrade someone or demean them.
I'm not saying that.
Find them. It's to say, hey man, like, I see these things about you. I don't know if you realize it, but I think these are some flaws you have.
Right. Yes, but to say that's not considering anything that I've made a point of, right? So like, I'm not saying anything about offense. I'm not saying anything about somebody being offended when someone says there's a problem with Black culture. I'm talking about the fact that it's ineffective to say Black culture and assume and basically think that fixing something within quote unquote Black culture is not fixing something in some other instance, which is what it's actually doing.
Hold on. I think we all know what I'm African American, right? So like here, like let me rattle off some, right? Like out of wedlock kids, like let me just, read the cliff notes from Cosby, because I agree. Like, out of wedlock kids, not respecting your parents, not respecting yourself, not seeing the value you have in yourself. fearing the police, right? Let's see, not reporting crimes to the police. The list goes on. Dressing a certain way that is undermining your person and your value. Speaking a certain way that does the same, etc. Not valuing in education, where someone speaks slang and someone speaks proper, you call them like an Uncle Tom, etc. This goes on. Like, and these are aspects of African American communities and thus culture, right?
Yeah.
And you can say that without saying every black person behaves this way, because obviously
yeah. No, I've addressed it. That's like it doesn't apply to all black people. Whatever's being referenced to as black culture. But the issue here now is whether or not black culture exudes this, or whether or not this is put upon black culture, right?
By others, you mean?
By other cultures, by other institutions, by virtually anything else, right?
To be honest, I don't think it matters. I honestly don't think it matters, because the institutions, I mean, I think people should work to reform these institutions, but I mean, I think that's almost almost a patronizing way to look at people. Like, oh, you can't do anything about this problem that was thrust upon you by others. You're just too weak to deal with it yourself. It just seems patronizing. Honestly.
That's not the perspective I'm trying to take, and I'm sorry if that's
I'm not offended or anything. I mean, but like, and I know that's not perspective you're taking, but I imagine, and I know a number of people who kind of resent that mode of view. I think honestly, I agree with Matt here. I mean, look, I don't think it should take being part of a culture to be able to critique a culture. Honestly, now we can talk about, is this culture really, like, we could talk about semantics, but at the end of the day, we all know what we're talking about when we say black culture. We're talking about the general view of African American culture, as especially among, I mean, in the quote unquote the ghetto, where, I mean, I think that's pretty clear. Correct me if I'm wrong about.
Yeah, but see, then the thing is, what I'm talking about here is particularly like the way that these systems work, especially the system of black culture and the things around it, and the contingency that kind of entail those things, such as black culture, right? So when it comes to the idea of black culture, it is very clear that black culture is not contingent upon the black community, but rather the effects happening within the black community, especially when it comes to the negative aspects of black culture.
Yeah. Well, I tried. I understand it's a contentious topic. Not many people want to weigh in on that, so we can topic.
Okay, new topic. Do Jews have double alliances?
Next topic in 1 minute.
The bot right on time, dude.
No, it's actually,
in the
I mean,
future, I'm gonna start muting people that start interrupting like repeatedly. So just keep that in mind.
Could you imagine that was?
What?
Could you
I'm
imagine?
not saying that anybody was doing it, but just like in the future, I'm gonna start enforcing that.
If someone is somewhat occupying a lot of the time, then I would say someone have to interrupt them, because if a person's speaking for a long
which is what I said.
What's the new topic? Something contentious.
Okay, so yeah, Ilhan Omar a few months back, she tweeted out something about like Jews having dual alliances, which is something held by both the right and the left. What do you guys?
You just got, there's a topic, a formal one.
Yeah. By the way, I'm Jewish, so before I get taxed.
I'm Jewish as well, technically.
I mean, what does it mean by a double alliance? Like,
well, I can actually attest that in some cases, I mean, I come from an Orthodox Jewish environment, and I can confirm very much that among at least the Zionist Orthodox Jews, there's definitely at least to some extent. I remember. I mean, this is all anecdotal, so a grain of salt, obviously. But at the high school I go to, which is Orthodox religious, they had to ask, like, they are flag there, but they had to, but then that was, which is fine. But then they're like, let's vote on whether we have an American flag, which is, no pun intended, kind of a red flag for me. And there's always, like this. There's a sentiment that among Orthodox Jews, at least, that we're just guests in this country. Israel's our homeland, which I see the good and bad sides of it.
For the topic change, I would just say like everybody has these cultural things that either keep them in these in-group out-groups and this Venn diagram of groupings. I think everybody behaves that way. Some behave that way to greater extents than others because of some historical sort of thing. I think everybody recognizes that it's a contentious topic, so people don't discuss it when it is a strong in-group preference for your ethnic group. We need to get beyond it. It would help heal the nation, and it's one of these things where it's a problem and people don't really discuss it much. And this is the reason why it doesn't get fixed. Like artists mentioned some groups who have strong in-group preference. It would be Jews, Spanish people, etc., just rattling off the list. Some people don't have as much of a preference. And in a society where you attempt to make everybody an American and equal, you're obviously going to have issues. So I don't know. It's gonna be a social issue. It's going to be an institutional one in some cases, and unless it's possible to talk about it, you can't address it. But I don't think anybody's like miffed about that existing. It definitely exists. All like ethnic groups, like.
So on the new topic, it looks like there hasn't been anybody that opposes, which I think is.
Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you.
Oh no, I did. I was done talking.
Oh well, I mean, if you need like a devil's advocate, I'm fine.
Yeah, I could probably like argue the other side too, because me being a good-blooded American, I love freedom, and I think the world should have freedom.
I would rather have like the South Korean people being able to live like without being nuclear killed.
If the North Koreans don't have freedom, we should go give it to them. Me, as a good, hard-blooded American, totally believes this.
For a small fee of several gallons of oil.
Hard-blooded?
I think again, this is one of those things where stability over like democracy, like we don't really even have like a shining example of it in our own country. So what the hell are you doing trying to export that somewhere else? I guess the big thing is take care of your own house before you try to fix other people's. And the biggest thing you can do if you're trying to help someone is make them stable. In that stability, you can communicate then the efficacy of democracy. But trying to do both of them and assuming that democracy gives someone stability is just ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous.
I mean, imagine thinking you actually want to help and just profit off of them.
Like,
true nature of it. Nobody wants to say that truth.
So, like when Germany transferred to democracy after World War I, that wasn't really stable. So,
okay.
like, not the end all be all of stability.
I mean, Germany is pretty stable right now, and we all know that democracy is the end of history, and that all stable countries will eventually develop its democracy. So spreading democracy will also help us, because if other countries are democratic, they're going to work with us.
Well, not necessarily, because the U.S. has a bunch of arms contract with Saudi Arabia, which is like the opposite of democracy.
Exactly, and if Saudi Arabia was a democracy, they would be way more willing to be allied with us. Like, the way that Saudi Arabia and American politics works is that Saudi Arabia, we have a trade deal, but we're also not very democratic. I'm sorry, I can't really argue this point. I don't believe it at all.
I could kind of see it. Okay, let me formulate. I mean, if everyone is like democratic, right? Then there's more, free flow of, the economy, of ideas, of, pretty much anything, and that would allow, more stability among all the nations. It might make it, for the short term, it might make America less stable, but I think in the long term, if they achieve the global democratic dream, then I imagine, everyone would it's a win-win situation. Who came up with this topic, honestly? If we really want to have a debate about this, we should debate whether or not there should be a one world, a one government, like an all-encompassing government.
Oh man, I wish.
Philosopher King.
Hell yeah. Constitutional monarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, the only world government that should exist would be an Ozpol monarchist one.
I'm more Outhprim.
What we really need is transhumanist primitivism.
What we need is we need Naz Juchi Outhprim.
Sure.
With Chinese characteristics.
No, with posadistic character. I met this guy on Discord. He was really drunk and he was talking about how he came up with this idea called trolleyism, which is like this accelerationist ideology where the state controls all corporations, and all the corporations are dedicated to creating more and better trains, and they entirely neglect the populace's like need for food or whatever. It's just trains, and that'll lead to an apocalypse. But on the bright side, everyone will have trains.
Here's another to fix America. What if, like, instead of voting, we have everyone vote, but like they put the name of who they want to be president in a ball, and then we roll it around like a lottery cage, and then we pick out one ball, and whoever name we pick out becomes president.
So like someone with I don't know, someone who's just like has just a massive hole in their head, like can become president.
Yes, it's called a lotocracy, ruled by the lottery.
It's like every day being principal.
Yes.
Okay, we're floundering here. We need a new topic.
Yeah, we need a new topic.
I think it's cool that you guys do the timer, but super oriented. I don't think people would ever agree to NWO because nobody has ever ran like a really tight ship when it comes to government. Most governments are like fucked up and with idiots. Nobody wants that on a global scale.
So you can just make the United States of the world, maybe. I don't know.
This is what I mean. This is why even in the United States we have states because the idea is the scale factor is just logistically inefficient and just ends up in catastrophe. Can't scale that thing to all these people speaking different languages, different culture, different forms. Like, hey, I want to marry a 15-year-old, and someone says no, that's completely wrong. This will be a disaster, dude.
Okay, so there's a new topic.
Should we?
Yeah,
we should
I
bail
believe,
out companies hurt by the quarantine.
just to start, I am proposing this.
I am abstaining.
I'll oppose for the sake of this.
No, wait, no. There's only one person proposing, and then there's two opposing. That's just. Oh no.
Wait, what?
I'm screwed.
Well, there's only one person proposing. That's me. So
I'm proposing
Wait.
as well.
react, so we know.
Okay, so we have 2 people proposing.
No, we have 3. I'm so.
No, because
No, it's just that the bot
one of them is
reacts.
from the bot. Oh, now we have 3. We have
Okay, I'll just be the guy opposed.
Okay, in general, why do you think that we should not bail them out?
Because I kind of have to in this instance, but no, well, because I don't think companies should exist. They should all
Okay,
just go to.
Marg, you don't have to. You can agree, and we can just maybe skip over it if we have no opposing.
I mean, I could see an argument for it being opposed in that if a company can't survive, then it doesn't deserve to be alive.
Social Darwinism.
Yeah,
I mean,
like
it
if
could
the
be a
company
small
can't survive just a simple crisis, it was gonna fail anyways.
It's not
A simple crisis.
I don't think it's right to call it a simple crisis, man.
It's only been a month.
It's been like 3. No, it started in November.
Well, it's only been a few months.
Personally, I oppose it because it's irresponsibility, fiscal responsibility, and it promotes the companies is taking as much money as they can from the government and then using it as much as they can to generate profit, and then just when shit goes to hell, when shit hits the fan, take the bailout.
Now that I
We're the
think about
ones
it,
paying for it.
I'm opposing.
Okay, well, I'm still proposing.
I'm opposing because, well, here's the thing. As long as we don't have like an effective system of universal basic income, companies should not be able to be bailed out by the government. That just seems utterly. I mean, like.
So, currently at this point, we're suffering economic downturn, and most part of the economic are from how much money the government really has, and it is already beginning to lower because exports imports, they are basically being cut off, which basically are just effectively taking away the government's income. But there's if we try to bail companies out, relatively small companies that can't survive this, it's going to be a lot more economic downturn and not much for to get back. Because really what you're doing is, it's more like just being an investor in general, just being like an investor. You're giving them money and you're hoping that they will succeed. If they don't succeed, that was simply lost money. That's like giving, say, a friend, let's say, $1 million, and you tell him to go to the casino. There's a chance that he's going to come back with $2 million, but he probably is going to come back with no money. And that's more or less what's going to happen with a bunch of companies. That's what's most likely going to happen.
Well, if we look at the 2008-2009 financial crisis, the government was able to bail out a bunch of automobile manufacturers and bail out a bunch of banks, and that helped keep our economy stable in the
No,
long term.
well, I think that there's a difference between banks and like automobile things. Those will, in general, at this point, they will probably survive. They will probably stay alive. They have enough money, and at this point they can simply shut down factories. It won't cause too much of a problem. However, companies like little tiny family-owned coffee shops or little restaurants, or simply little startups, those are probably gonna have to either completely shut themselves down, put themselves under lockdown to make sure that they're not spending any money at all, which would be very hard considering that they need to pay their employees at least a little bit, I think. And they would actually lose a lot of reputation if they didn't pay their employees. But anyway, they go completely under lockdown and suffer the consequences of doing this, or they have to go and they have to lose a lot of money. And like I said, small coffee shop, little startup, they either their only option here is to shut down. But if the government was to bail them out, in general, startups, I don't really think that startups will always succeed. A startup is more like kind of just, using a slot machine.
Well, yeah, startups are basically like ventures that can go, they can bust or they can boom.
Yeah, that's really it's more a startup is gambling. You either get more or you lose.
I'm sorry. I'm not sure which point you're arguing.
Maybe a new topic.
All right.
Okay.
Well, I can argue in the proposing side, or like saying that there should be bailouts, but I think a lot of small businesses are gonna die without the bailout. Like that's the biggest problem. Like I think a lot of large businesses will be hurt extremely bad, but still exist. But if small businesses are a huge part of like the economic growth of this country, large businesses without like direct competition from small business will just end up like just growing. They'll be fine. So unless we want there to be a lot fewer small businesses, a lot less care for small businesses that obviously can't survive these crises, I think we should bail them out.
I mean, I guess the disagreement is that the company should even.
The disagreement, our stalemate here, is that the proposing side says small companies are important to the economic setup. And hold on, does anyone have any like statistics showing like a pie chart or whatever?
Specifically of what?
I don't know, just
Like
like a
the
pie chart
economic,
of saying
like the economic value of small
like
businesses versus large
government part
businesses.
of maybe just like a pie chart saying like the economic importance of, say, government, private, and public. Wait, no, not public. Just government, private, large and small.
This source right here says small businesses generate 44% of U.S. economic activity, and that is SBA.gov. I'll link it. And especially with jobs, like if you don't bail out the businesses, there's going to be a huge loss of jobs.
All right, so I think we may or may not have come to some sort of a conclusion. Here is my conclusion. Okay. Well, I guess we did come to a conclusion anyway because Death said so.
Wait, what is this?
What is this?
What?
Oh man.
This isn't even a debate topic. It's just stating the fact.
Video games cause violence.
But yeah, I don't think anyone is influenced by these narratives in like video games. You should just fire up multiplayer and go for it.
Anime is pedophilia.
I mean,
Ooh, big goof.
Gamers,
I mean,
right?
it can affect how a person views war. What?
I mean, video games don't make you violent. They do show how
It's not. I hope it's. I don't think it says. I don't think it says like they cause violence. I'm focusing on the point. point where they says view things like war. I think it kind of just puts it lighter because in general, the way actually now that I think of it, no.
So what you're saying is it desensitizes you.
Yeah, in a way.
Actually, now that I think of it, yeah, I'm
It
gonna have to
does.
go opposing.
If you like, I feel like while the message of the game is mostly to be anti-war, a lot of kids look at it like, "Oh, this is so cool." So it ends up doing the opposite. Like I know a few people that are like, I joined the military because I played Call of Duty as a kid, and they're like, it just looks so cool.
Yeah, pretty much.
Do you guys remember that documentary on? I think I don't remember exactly which war it was, but it was one of the more modern ones where a soldier was like, during drone bombings, he was like, "This is just like playing the video games I had as a kid." It's stuff like that. Like it desensitizes you, and it makes
They
the idea
do.
of war. It makes the idea of war a lot less like bad.
They do use VR simulations for combat training.
I'm just talking about video games in general. Like a lot of people will like credit like video games for making them more interested in engaging in the military, even though that might not be the point. Even like it's the media affects how you view something, whether it be video games or like news or like propaganda. I'm not saying that video games make you violent. I'm saying that it both desensitizes you and gives you a viewpoint that you might not otherwise had.
It's not necessarily bad though.
Sure.
Good combat video games will actually make that a moral quandary for you to solve.
There's a lot of video games that do it very well. Spec Ops: The Line will make you pretty anti-war, and that's like part of the message of the game. So it really depends on the type of media. Like, there's a lot of media that will like make you say want to become a soldier, like propaganda media. Like that obviously exists, and we still do sometimes high schoolers. But it's kind of hard to say Call of Duty encourages things. Yeah.
I'm a little confused about all of that, honestly. I mean, you have to be pretty disconnected from reality to let. I mean, listen, media changes how you think to some extent always. I understand that, but to allow like a video game to change your perception entirely, like in a significant. I don't think I honestly fail to see how it would influence anyone with anyone who should be who has any business playing those video games. I don't see how it would influence them in any. Like, I mean, I get it. Yeah, young kids probably shouldn't be playing that game. Yeah, sure. Be an adult. You know, to make sure, like, I mean, people should be able to gauge what their children should and shouldn't play. That's what ratings are. I don't really see the conflict here.
Yeah, and that's also what parenting is for.
Exactly.
I've seen the opposite where like video games serve as like a relief valve for like testosterone, tension, and all of this stuff. It's like people get it out of their systems, acclimate themselves back to reality. I would say it actually has the opposite effect if I were to make a claim. But I think it's neutral. Like I don't think I'm just being.
Yeah, I think you can't just say in general about this because some games do it like different.
Okay,
I played like
you guys
games,
have
killing games. Like they're just games.
Have any of you, okay, when you guys were playing Doom Eternal, if any of you have played it, did you ever once consider, I should do this to, I don't know, like a retirement home? No, that's not something like a normal person thinks of. Like,
I even wonder what your brain state is when you're playing video games, because obviously you don't interpret it as like real. But I guess equivalent to like your dream state, where like if you had some crazy dream that was outside your control, like gonna wake up and become a murderer. So I think brain likely triggers into a completely different state when you're playing video games, such that it doesn't really have any serious effect. You know that's not you. You know none of these things are real. So.
And I think look at the difference between a video game and a movie is that it gives a player choice. And a lot of times, well, when games do it well with choice, they'll put you into moral dilemmas that'll make you understand like the situation. Like Spec Ops: The Line, Spec Ops: The Line does a lot. Like it does it super well, where it makes you realize like, oh hey, killing somebody isn't something that's a very light topic, for example. So it could be used as like a teaching tool in that way.
What about like Grand Theft Auto, where you just the funnest part is just driving around and running over like random people on the sidewalk, but I would never do so in real life. You literally play that to just run around and run people over, annoy other multiplayer users, like shoot at them, do all the chaotic things that I would never do in real life, but it's a video game.
All right, but if you had a virtual simulation indistinguishable from reality, would you still do it?
If I knew
would I know? Would I know that it's
you know it's virtual, but it is indistinguishable.
So now we're getting into uncanny Westworld Valley. I don't know.
Basically.
A point there. I don't know. I probably wouldn't. Because it would be too real. Your brain would literally have aversions, I would think. Does it become realistic? Since we know it's not real. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you know it's not, but your brain would be like, whoa.
It's too real. Like your brain would be like, all right, I can't distinguish this from reality. Like you're gonna have aversions, I think, the same ones you'd have in real life. I think as we get closer to the uncanny valley, it's definitely gonna become a more serious discussion.
Yeah,
games are getting to that point. But
as we approach VR and VR becomes mainstream, I predict to see a resurgence of the whole big people violence debate. Except we're gonna have a lot more divergence this time.
I agree. I actually agree there. Good point. Very good point. Just so I'm clear, like I don't play games with like storylines or narratives. I guess are the games getting like kind of like sketchy with regards to that? Because I usually just play multiplayer. But I can imagine if you're going through some storyline where you're committing like serious acts of violence against people, it would kind of fuck with me. I'm not gonna lie.
I mean, yeah, storylines in most Modern Warfare games are like anti-war. Like they kind of have this sort of anti-war sentiment.
Okay.
I mean, like
Next
that,
topic.
you had those.
Political correctness is a good thing.
Wow, these are all like
Spicy.
I mean, like, no, I don't
What
know
is
if anyone.
political correctness? Is that when you have correct political opinion? But no, like seriously, what is political correctness?
I mean, it's just so cringe, like making fun of SJWs nowadays. The whole discussion about political correctness on both sides is just so cringe, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. Stupid.
I am opposed.
Am I gonna have to be the devil's advocate for this stupid ass?
Be scared. Fuck you, bro.
I mean, I can try. We'll see how I can flex my rhetorical muscles.
Would have thought. Server is so based in red pill.
I mean, yeah, no, I don't think this server is really for political correctness as it is. But like, here's like a problem is that there isn't really a good definition that I know of. Because like sometimes political correctness is like not calling black people the N-word. Sometimes it's like trying to grovel for minorities. So like, is not groveling at minorities bad or good?
That's a spicier discussion, actually.
I would say with that, it's like use your own discretion. Like I wouldn't go around saying it because of the consequences, even though like so if a person really wants to say that, like I mean, political correctness, like let them say it, but like they probably bad things are gonna happen to them. So
I mean, you always have to interrogate why they want to say it. So like if somebody does say it, you gotta be like, okay, so why do you say that?
Yeah. Yeah, play with fire. Sometimes you get burnt. So this is self-regulation. A good thing. Now, to what extent the consequences are in line with what you would say is the nature of that word, I wouldn't put hands on anyone saying something. That's criminal, right? Like you can't assault someone because they said something. So I think you say something, someone says something back, or makes you feel uncomfortable. Like the problem with that. They're bad because they're used too leniently. Like, hate speech, and then as long as you're not threatening someone with like sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Like I don't know how you even get in the territory of speech. Like what does that even mean?
So are you saying stuff like we should attack everybody in this minority? That's bad, right?
Oh, that's inciting violence. You can't.
Yeah, so that's hate speech.
That's hate speech, or is that?
Well, inciting
If
violence.
If I say let's rally around and attack the city of the suburb of Harlem or whatever, like that's hate speech.
I thought that was inciting violence. I thought that's completely different than hate speech.
That's like shouting. But it's like shouting fire in an opera house or whatever. Like it's
something else too. Like hate speech is just like, hey, I hate. Like here's the way I hate you. inciting violence or like inciting panic are two different things. Like, those I think obviously should not be okay.
Yeah, it's part of the definition of hate speech, but
like
okay. Who would do that? Who would sit there and like, bro, I hate you like at work, like because of your skin color? Or, like,
no, you could just be like, oh, those freaking Mexicans.
Wait, is
That's
there a
what-
list
that's
of
what it could be.
protected groups I should be referring to?
I would feel that all are protected.
All right.
I feel because it's so common sense not to practice it unless you're joking. Like, I don't know.
Well, I sent the definition in the debate hall chat.
Okay.
So, like, is expressing hate towards one of those groups a bad thing? Like, well, it's saying it, like, the words themselves is expressing that, like, verbally instead
But
of
it's-
just keeping those ideas to yourself. Is that a bad thing?
Are fat people protected?
Oh yeah. Do you know fat studies is an actual thing?
wait, what?
Well, yeah, fat studies
Yes,
should
it's
be
a
a
branch. It's a branch of sociology, just studying fat people.
Wow.
It's a very contentious topic. So.
Just like the identity of being fat, which is, I mean,
Oh, I thought you meant like
it's
of like fat.
no,
what
like
about-
I'm convinced.
Like-
I'm against like hate speech. Yeah, because it just seems so pointless now that I read the definition. Why you would just sit there and kind of like harass.
I agree. Judging people based on their race, ethnicity, etc., is pointless. But what if we just judge them based on their intellectual capacity?
What are you suggesting?
So like,
Is it hate speech then if we segregate based on intellectual capacity?
I mean,
By what measure?
you're creating a synthetic identity, and then putting it in a box. So I guess it's, if not hate speech, it's the margin.
actually, don't schools do that? Like, you have different classrooms for like people with intellectual abilities.
They do, and there's people who like actually believe in this as an ideology.
And then there's also like classes where like the kids with good high grades go or whatever.
Like the whole bell curve book.
I mean, I think, well, IQ tests in general are pretty superfluous overall. They test a small aspect of
It serves its purpose. It doesn't act your intelligence as much as measure how much you're diverging from the standard deviation.
Yeah, and in that specific way of testing, and like
It was meant to identify people who have learning disabilities or other issues.
So, like, if
it wasn't
develop
meant
a
to measure intelligence.
Yeah, so if you develop like some way of measuring intelligence, and then like you separate based on that, that'd be kind of stupid since it's one, it depends on your measure of intelligence, and two, dividing based on that is disregarding a lot of positive aspects of humanity.
However, there is an observable correlation between IQ and like progress and how much a person develops in their life, what kind of jobs they can achieve and such, that we can.
Well, yeah, that's because a lot of jobs are like in modern capitalist society are more focused on stuff like innovation and
social
advancement.
Socioeconomic status and prosperity are directly correlated with IQ.
There's also the thing of like, if you're poor, you're not going to have the same like type of schooling that a rich person has. And there's very good evidence to suggest that the type of schooling you had is a huge, like the biggest influence on your IQ score. Like there is, of course, some genetic variability, and also like having a higher IQ is going to help you with these jobs. But it also goes both ways, where like being like in a richer place with better education, more tutors, more practice for stuff like, say, like a standardized test, it's going to help you a lot. If you take an IQ test, you understand that the problems they give you are stuff that you could actually practice to an extent. Which is also why like a lot of people in say poorer countries where like they're literate, they never seen an IQ test or anything resembling the IQ test, are going to do a lot worse. Like they're not going to understand what's going on because they've never seen it before. But like if you were to teach them, if you were to practice with them for years and years on end, in the way that a lot of people who have the opportunity to go to school do, you're going to notice that their IQ, they're going to go up. We also don't value stuff like artistic creativity as much as, say, having like a higher IQ, because
They're all parts of
like
intelligence that we recognize.
yeah, they're all parts of intelligence, but we prefer people to be smarter so that they could innovate more, so that they could push the economy forward.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you see, I've watched Rick and Morty, so I think I can understand what having IQ means.
Are you sure?
Okay.
Yes.
I may I propose a new topic? Do you guys think Donald Trump will complete the system of German ideal?
Well, like I in New York said he would, so, and I believe him. He seemed very excited about it.
I don't think he's competent enough to do anything.
Is Donald Trump a Hegelian?
He's a Kantian. He's a Kant, and he's doing. I'm telling.
I think Trump has already overcome Hegel.
Yeah, he's past Hegel.
Yeah, it was fun.
Should gamers have rights?